Hello, good day everyone. I'm Marjon Tinonga, and together with Miss Tanasas and Miss Sarim, we are going to discuss a new interesting lesson. Our topic for today is about geography. Before we start, let me read to you first the learning objectives of this lesson. At the end of the lesson, the student should be able to first discuss geography's impact on culture, provide specific examples of regional diversity, create a Venn diagram to compare and contrast rural, urban, suburban areas, and fourth, explain the factors leading to migration, describe the history and impact of globalization, and lastly, they should provide specific examples of how to incorporate students' cultural and geographic differences in the classroom. To start up with, let us define first what is geography. Geography comes from the Greek word geographia, which means description of Earth's surface. It is the study of places, cities, countries, mountains, deserts, rural areas, oceans, continents, and communities. Geographers do not only explore the physical features of the place, but also examine the economic activities of human settlement patterns. This also includes the culture of the people who live there. The places where once lived in the space or land area that has distinctive and has meaning or symbolism to the people who are living in such region. So, geography has two classification. The first one is the physical geography, which is the study of the physical features of Earth, such as climate, soils, vegetation, water, and landforms. The next one is the human geography, which is the study of economic, social, and cultural systems that have evolved in a specific location. It encompasses many of the topics that are discussed in this book, such as classicism, racism, ethnicity, poverty, language, sexual orientation, religion, exceptionalities, and age differences. Geographers uses a number of tools to record and track the physical and human geography of a place. Maps are the most common, as you probably remember from your study of geography. With today's technology, geographers are able to understand an area in great and intricate detail through the use of computers, global positioning system, GPS devices, and satellite images. Now let us move on to geography and culture. As we all know, our identities are closely linked to the geographic area in which we grow up and places we later live. However, just because we grew up in the same and similar geographic area as our neighbors or friends, it doesn't mean that we experience the place in the same ways. Some members of the community had lived there much longer than the others and have different histories, experiences that sometimes lead to the conflict with more recent arrivals. The area takes on a different meaning based on a member's race, religion, age, and language, as well as how membership in those groups is viewed by other members of the community. So, the factors that affect human behavior and experiences includes, of course, the race, ethnicity, religion, language, age, and very important is the culture. Now for the next enclosure of my coverage, we have regional diversity. Regional diversity implies diversity or differences that exist in the terms of culture, language, spoken, and food. This also includes the clothes in different regions. Regional differences become apparent to educators as they move from one area to another just to work. Sometimes local and regional differences are hardly noticeable. At the other times, they lead to a number of adjustments in the way one lives. The content can be taught in the classroom and the manner in which some interacts with the community. So, characteristic of the population and land on which people live can be used to group geographic areas with similar landscapes and histories. So, the racial, ethnic, and religious diversity varies from one region to another. So, the interests and perspectives of those who live in such geographic regions often are reflected in their stand in state and federal issues and are reflected also in the national elections. So for the first regional diversity, we have differences in education. So regional differences in education across regions are partly due to regionally diverging supplies of educational training and programs, differing admissions regulation in federal education system, and our segregated neighborhoods and the dismantling of educational infrastructures in rural areas or the expansions of private schooling in urban class. So let's have here an example. So in United States, as one travel across various regions, significant differences can be found across areas in relation to education. So individuals exploring teaching opportunities will find the average salaries in some states are considerably higher or lower than the others. So as we can see in this table, these are the different wages or salaries teacher gained in various specific regions. So the average salary is $56,689. However, in some region like in the southeast part and in Rocky Mountains, reveals that teacher's salary is below average. So such situation could affect the motivation of the educator to teach in that certain region. The occurrence of that phenomena results in educational attainment varying across the area. So therefore, the percentage of individual aging 25 and above without a high school diploma varies across the different region in the country. So now let's move on to the regional religious differences. So regional religious differences refers to the concept of having different diversity in the aspect related to religion, such as gods, rituals, practices, and culture. So it is believed that all religions are equally important and their teachings are equally relevant. Religious differences are one of the most important and perhaps the most important of the regional differences considered in United States and in other parts of the world, including Philippines. So the daily behaviors and values of an individual may have a direct correlation to the individual's religious beliefs. So the diets, values, and politics are often functions of one religion. So the study of Newport in 2014 found a significant differences in the religiosity of American people. So based on their study, people in that region are identified as 41% very religious, somewhat religious 29%, and 29% non-religious. So 10 of these regions are religious and most of them are from the south. So individuals tend to support their either liberal or conservative platforms, parties, and candidates. Now for the last part of my coverage, we have here the regional political differences. So a political region is defined by a specific government and set of rules. Countries are a great example of political regions because ev- every country is a sovereign territory with its own government. So we have here the map of US, which shows the 2012 presidential election cartography. So during that election, the conclusion of every national election maps of election results are posted in the media in the form of color-coded maps of all the states. So the maps use the traditional red for the states won by the Republicans and blue for those who are won by the Democrats. So just like in the Philippines, our 2022 elections cartographic map shows that presidential candidate Bongbong Marcos wins the majority vote of the Filipino people. So Bongbong Marcos wins the majority vote of the people, garnering 31,104,175. So these are the majority vote as of May 13, 2022. So at any moment in our history, BBM will be declared as the 17th president of the country. So that is all for my part for the geography and regional diversity.
So the next subtopic to be discussed is globalization. So what is globalization and what does it have to do with geography? As we all know, geography is the study of places and the relationship of people and their environment, the relationship of the people. So how do we build relationship? Yes, it is through globalization. Globalization refers to intensified geographical movements across national borders of commodities, people seeking employment, money and capital investment, knowledge, cultural values, and environmental pollutants. So, in globalization, people move from one place to another, from one country to another country. Same goes to our products and goods. We trade our products to other countries and vice versa. The early stages of globalization occurred when European nations began to colonize the Americas, Africa, and India in the late 15th century. While the colonizers follow a policy called the Manifest Destiny, in which they considered their culture as the superior, while the cultures of the colonized countries are considered inferiors. Of course, the cultures of the strong one should be considered as superiors. It was until after the World War II that many countries were able to become independent from their colonizers. But the colonizers quickly centralized their power in 1984. They centralized their power through establishing the GATT, or the General Agreement on Tariffs and Taxes, which later became the World Trade Organization, or the WTO. With the membership beyond the European colonizers, the goal of the WTO was to reduce barriers of trade so that the goods and labor could move more easily across national borders. So yes, it was through the World Trade Organization. The World Trade Organization take the control in our trading system. So under globalization, here is economics. Economic issues influence our daily lives. This includes issues such as tax and inflation, rates, interest rates and wealth, inequality and emerging markets, and energy and environment. So events in one country can affect other countries around the world. For example, if there will be an adjustment in the Philippine stock market, of course, the companies owned by other countries, maybe the companies under that stock market will be affected as well. The whole companies will be affected. So our economy today is now starting to foster. It has dropped since the pandemic started. So thanks to technology, we are able to open the businesses. The trading as well is now good, and but it was closed. The infrastructures was closed. All the businesses was closed due to pandemic. But since we discovered the new technology, the modern technology, we are now able to trade our products. We are now able to communicate again, to connect to other countries. So technology is both changing the job market and opening communications across national borders. It provides opportunities to connect people around the world. The use of computers and cellular phones around the globe has increased dramatically over the past decades. So yes, it has increased dramatically over the past decades. Even in even in school, we use technology, we use gadgets, we use gadgets for us to learn, for us to communicate with our teachers, with our classmates, and whoever we want to communicate with. Next is environment. A number of factors contribute to the degradation of the environment and the world's ecosystem. As the world's population increases, the needs for food, clean water, sanitation, and jobs also increase. Another factor is the increased consumption of natural resources and produced goods by the populations of industrialized countries. So the environment is also greatly influenced by global conditions, changes, and decisions. A volcano, an explosion, a fire, or an spill in one country can impact the environment and economy of many other countries, as ash or other pollutants are spread by wind or water around the earth. So yes, since we rely on our environment, our economics, the globalization as well, will be affected if something will happen to our environment. Yes. Next is the resistance by indigenous people. So how does the resistance of the indigenous people affects the globalization? As we all know, not all people are excited about the globalization that is opening up the world to the interests of corporations, investors, and politicians. Indigenous people are only 5% of the world population, but some are living on natural resources that others desire. Today, groups of indigenous people are fighting in courts and public forums for their rights to sovereignty, self-governance, and collective ownership rather. Many do not want to assimilate into the dominant society. So 5%, that 5% barely have voice to speak up, to fight for their rights. Those indigenous people, those who live in the mountains, for example, rely on our natural resources. The natural resources are their source for food, their source of income, their source of living. So, for example, mining. If there will be a mining, of course, the natural resources will be affected. So those people living in the mountains will be affected as well. So that's why those indigenous people don't want mining. We want our country to be at par with other countries, yet we don't want our natural resources to be affected. But the globalization, meaning we all the things here in our country will be affected. The natural resources, the environment, the economy, everything will be affected. So next is incorporating students' cultural and geographic differences into the classroom. People move from one place to another. Therefore, diversity in community is inevitable, especially in a classroom. So it is inevitable to have an immigrant student. So how can we incorporate our students' cultural and geographic differences into the classroom? First, teaching immigrant students. In teaching immigrant students, you should be conscious. The teacher should be conscious of the ethnic identification of immigrant students. They may be at very different stages of assimilation, which means they cannot be thought of as a homogeneous group. Some students will identify strongly with the dominant group. Others will be transcultural or successful in figuring out how to fuse the culture of the dominant society to their native culture. Still, other students will strongly identify with their native cultures and even resist or develop opposition to the dominant culture. If you understand where they are, you can better understand how to use their native cultures to help them learn and possibly counter their opposition to academic achievement. So yes, it is hard for an immigrant student to cope up or to go with other students. So as a teacher, you should identify, you should be conscious of their ethnic identification. You should help them counter their opposition to academic achievement. Next is honoring family cultures. Students' cultural backgrounds should be reflected in the examples used to teach. Rural students, rural students do not relate to riding a subway to school or work, nor do inner city students easily relate to single family homes with large yards and no other houses around them. It would be hard to relate to a story in a book about a father who is a pilot if you have never been close to an airport, of course. A teacher who understands the experiences of students from different cultural backgrounds can use that knowledge to help students learn subject matter. A teacher's sensitivity to those differences can be used to make students from oppressed groups feel as comfortable in the class as those from the dominant culture. So, yes. Next is incorporating global perspective. Because our world has become so interdependent and will become even more so in the future, it is important that students have an understanding of global connections and how they impact their lives. As you plan lessons, think about how you can integrate worldwide events and actions. Natural disasters such as a tsunami, an earthquake, or a volcanic eruption rather, provides an opportunity to learn about the part of the world in which the disaster occurred, the people affected, and the implications for the United States and even for them in particular. So you have to let them discover, let them know the global perspectives. You should be, yes, you should let them learn global connections and how those connections impact their lives. So another strategy for incorporating global issues into the curriculum is to help your students think about topics from the perspective of different classes of people in another country. Their perspectives on an issue could be the same or quite different from those of students in your classroom. Using the internet, using the internet, your students can connect to students in classrooms around the world. Some schools connect their students as pen pals to students in other countries. I remembered I remembered my elementary days. I think I experienced this one. Students in different countries should work together on projects to learn more about each other or an issue or a project in which both countries are engaged. Students from all kinds of schools participate in exchange programs with families around the world. around the world. Teachers sometimes sponsor trips for students to visit other countries. The possibilities for interacting with people from other countries will continue to expand as we increasingly use technology to work together. So, for us as a teacher educator, we should know that to incorporate our students to global perspective, it is important to have a technology. It is important for us to introduce technology to our students. Next is working with families and communities. Teachers need to listen to parents and participate in the community to develop a range of teaching strategies that are congruent with the home cultures of students. Parents can learn to support their children's learning at home, but may need concrete suggestions, which they will seek from teachers who they believe care about their children. Educators must know the community to understand the cultures of families. Yes, as a teacher educator myself, we should know how to communicate with other families. We should talk to the parents. The teachers should talk to the parents of their students and as well as the communities. So all of those Are they factors affecting globalization? And yes, affecting the globalization. So that should be all. I think we met all our lessons objectives. So that should be all. I think we met our lesson objectives so far. So that should be all. Thank you and God bless.